Hey everyone, welcome to The New Populist. I'm Dave Brown. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Now we have a lot of craziness going on right now with Ukraine and Russia. We are several days into this Russian invasion, and the consensus by the media and by the establishment is that Vladimir Putin is a crazy person. He potentially has a terminal illness. He's acting irrationally. He was unprovoked, and this is entirely his fault. Now, if you contest that, you are a Putin stooge. You are controlled by the Kremlin. You're a Russian puppet. And anytime the establishment, anytime the thought is that you cannot talk about different possibilities of why something happened, I get very suspicious, and it makes me want to dig in and see what's going on that they don't want us to talk about. If it were that clear cut that Putin was wrong, there would be no impetus to try to stifle free speech and push people into taking only one position without any question. But that's what's going on. You can't have another opinion. You can't ask questions. If you do that, you're a bad person. Now, of course, disclaimer, I don't like Putin. What's happening in Ukraine is absolutely terrible, devastating for that country. There's going to be the loss of a lot of innocent lives there, civilians. This is not a good thing. However, when you look at actions like this by a country like Russia, you have to step back and try to, without emotion, look at the situation and what led up to that situation. If you don't do that, you run the risk of something happening in the future that could have been avoided had you paid attention to how a previous disaster occurred. So we need to understand how we got to this point in order to, in the future, hopefully, make sure something like this doesn't happen again. And I want to go back and sort of look at the progression over the last several years to the point now. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Monroe Doctrine, because here in the United States, we have the Monroe Doctrine, which says nobody messes around in our sphere of influence in North America. We're the big dog here. If you try to get in our space, there's going to be a problem. Obviously, you're familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Russians tried to put nuclear warheads in Cuba, and we would have none of that. And thankfully, it ended peacefully. They withdrew, and that was the end of that. Now, we have this Monroe Doctrine, and we would be insane to think that Russia would not have its own version of a Monroe Doctrine, and certainly China as well. And if we acknowledge that, then we have to ask ourselves, what actions do we take as NATO and as expanding, as a country that's expanding our power in Europe? At what point does Russia have a reason to be worried or a reason to push back against that? Because if we look at NATO over the years, it has steadily expanded east toward Russia. In the beginning, it was just a handful of countries. And if you actually watch over time, and I'll go ahead and show this map here, you can see Russia or NATO steadily expanding across Europe, and to the point now where it is proposed that at some point in the future, depending on how this conflict ends, that Georgia, or at least Ukraine, becomes part of NATO. Now, this is not, NATO was first proposed to expand into Ukraine years ago, back during the George W. Bush administration. He suggested that Ukraine join NATO. So just to give you a refresher, I want to play a clip from March of 2008 of George Bush talking about Ukraine and talking about Georgia. Check it out.
So we spent a lot of time talking about NATO. First, I do want to remind people that Ukraine and the NATO alliance have built a strong partnership. Ukraine is the only non-NATO nation supporting every NATO mission. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Ukrainian troops are helping to support young democracies. In Kosovo, Ukrainians are helping keep the peace. Ukraine now seeks to deepen its cooperation with the NATO alliance through a membership action plan. Your nation has made a bold decision, and the United States strongly supports your request. In Bucharest this week, I will continue to make America's position clear. We support MAP for Ukraine and Georgia. Helping Ukraine move toward NATO membership is in the interest of every member in the alliance and will help advance security and freedom in this region and around the world.
Now, this video or this clip was from 2008 in March. What happened just 6 months later? Let me refresh your memory. Play the clip.
Overseas, a fierce battle broke out today on the fringe of the former Soviet Union. Tonight, Secretary of State Rice is calling on Russia to end its assault on the Republic of Georgia, now a U.S. ally. The fighting is in Georgia's province of South Ossetia, home to many Russians who are still loyal to the Kremlin and want to break away from Georgia. Richard Roth has the latest.
So 6 months after George Bush said this, Russia invades Georgia. Now, if we think about the importance of Ukraine and Georgia to Russia, it should be pretty obvious that those are two countries that fall within that sort of their Monroe Doctrine. Remember, Stalin was a Georgian. Leon Trotsky, one of the leading Bolsheviks or leading Marxists in Russia, was a Ukrainian. They are very, very close to Russia ethnically in certain parts of Ukraine. Obviously, Georgian is a little different, but those two countries were part of the Soviet Union, and many of the leading members of the Soviet Union were from those countries too. So to think that Russia would not have their own version of the Monroe Doctrine with Georgia and Ukraine, I think is nonsensical. Of course they do, and they invaded Georgia in 2008. Now, moving along, we have Ukraine 2013, 2014. The president there at the time is being pushed out by pro-Western sentiment by people in the country who want to be closer to Europe. He was a pro-Russian president, and eventually he is forced out, and we, the United States, had something to do with that. During this process, the Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, had a phone call released where she's talking to the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and she's discussing how they want to position the parts. Who should go where, who should be the prime minister, who should not be, and she's strategizing what they're going to do. So when people say that Ukraine spontaneously became a democracy in 2013, 2014, and we had nothing to do with that, that is far from the truth. Listen to this phone call right here.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big 3 were going into their own meeting, and that Yats was going to offer in that context a 3-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got. He's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the 3, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
And notice she talked about the 3 of them and herself and the ambassador all having this group phone call to discuss what was going on. Clearly, she had some ideas of what they should do, and we had a hand in it. Now, something else that's interesting is that in 2013, Russia gave $15 billion to Ukraine. And this was before the change in government. Afterwards, when they went to collect their money, Ukraine said, no, we're not paying you. And this actually went to international court. So it's funny that they loan the money, the new government comes in, and they say, we're not paying you. And instead, they accept money from the United States, billions of dollars, in a new loan, and Russia wanted some of that money to pay them back for the money they had given them in 2013. So this just again shows you this battle between the US and Russia and Ukraine, sort of playing both sides and getting the money they can from whoever will give it to them, and then basically sticking it to Russia after the government changed over. So let's now move forward to 2016, because Lindsey Graham and John McCain went there. And listen to what they said. I always find it funny. 2 U.S. senators in Ukraine addressing military guys here. Listen to what they said.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win.
Now, if you're Russia and you see these 2 prominent senators saying, we want you to go on the offensive, we want you to, we're part of you, we're going to give you the weapons you need. What is Russia thinking? Does that sound like a neutral democracy, or does that sound like the United States is sticking its nose in? That's 2016. And then 2018, we have the impeachment of Donald Trump over what? Ukraine, and his not wanting to give them money, and allegedly in exchange for that money, he wanted them to get dirt on Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, whatever. And so again, Ukraine pops up. How else did Ukraine pop up? Joe Biden, famously on tape, he said, you're not getting this $1 billion unless you fire this prosecutor. Once again, Ukraine. Where was Joe Biden's son making his money? In Ukraine. You see what's happening here? All this U.S. involvement in Ukraine And we're going to look at you with a straight face and tell you that, oh, they're just this independent, new democracy. We're not involved in it. They just want to be part of the West. And no, what do you actually see? You see constant U.S. involvement. Now let's move forward. Adam Schiff in 2020 during I think it was the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Listen to what he says here.
One American, a war hero and statesman who is no stranger to this body, recognized the threat posed by Russia's invasion of Crimea, Senator John McCain. In an interview, he declared, quote, "We are all Ukrainians." Senator McCain advised that this is a chess match reminiscent of the Cold War, and we need to realize that and act accordingly. The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
Now, that wasn't hiding anything there. He says, we want to fight them over there, Russia, so we don't have to fight them here. If you're Russia, how do you look at that? So the United States is giving them weapons. The United States is saying, we want you to go on the offensive. The United States is saying, we want to fight Russia over there, so we don't have to fight them here. If you're Russia, what do you make of this? Ukraine, on your border, your biggest land border in the east, or sorry, the west, not the east, with a country that you were so closely aligned to before, and that was a part of your country before. And here the West is, the United States, throwing money at them, saying, go fight them, go on the offensive. What is Russia to think? And so now we have in 2022, Russia says, okay, we've been watching long enough. We're going to make our move and invade Ukraine before Ukraine becomes a part of NATO. Because once they become part of NATO, the game's over. As you see, Putin won't attack a NATO country, and NATO won't defend a non-NATO country. The minute Ukraine becomes part of NATO, now you have the entire encirclement of Russia. Their Monroe Doctrine breaks down, and they feel like they're going to eventually be crushed to death and squeezed out of existence. And I think the long-term strategy is to isolate Russia. And at some point, we know the CIA loves to have regime change. And they think that if they isolate Russia and put enough pressure on them economically, eventually they will have that regime change and Putin will be thrown out. Of course, this doesn't always work, and sometimes this ends in disaster, as we've seen in the past. But that was their plan. And one thing I'll put forward is that I think we knew that Russia would invade Ukraine. I think we were well aware. I think we were using them as a sacrificial lamb to weaken Russia and give the United States and the rest of the Western world a reason to put more sanctions on Russia and isolate them economically further. If you follow the pattern here, that's clearly, it was clearly on that path to Russia invading Ukraine. And we were cheering on Ukraine the entire way. Go after them, go after them. Here's a gun, go fight them. And then Russia invades, and we act shocked. Oh my God, Russia invaded Ukraine. How did this happen? What do you mean, how did this happen? We gave them weapons and told them to fight you guys, fight Russia. That's how it happened. And Putin said, okay, I'm making my move now before NATO expands into Ukraine. Because when that happens, now I got to fight the entire West, and obviously mutually assured destruction, that can't happen. So if you're going to make your move, you have to make it while Ukraine is not part of NATO. That's how I see it. Now, again, does this mean that Putin is right? No. Does that mean that United States is right? No. Am I taking a side? Well, I'm an American, so I'm just clearly on the side of America. But if we're being honest, and if we're trying to understand what's going on and find the rationale for what's going on, and you step back, you look at it and you go, Russia had the reasons for invading Ukraine, as barbarous as it is, as destructive as it is, as horrifying as it is for the entire world, there is a calculus for them, a rationale that makes absolute sense. And it's easy for us in the West to simply go, Putin is the new orange man bad. Putin bad. He's crazy. I don't know what he's doing. Crazy? No. He's very logical. He's been in that position in Russia in power for over 20 years. It's not because he's impulsive and reckless. He is very clever, and the things he does is obviously very well planned out. Now, this war is not going as well as maybe you think it might. The problem, though, is that there is an incredible amount of propaganda. It's hard to know how badly or how well the Russians are doing. Ultimately, they will win. And I think our entire goal is not for Ukraine to win. They never had a chance to win. Our entire goal is to give Ukraine enough support that they can damage Russia badly and make this invasion very costly for Russia in terms of loss of men, loss of equipment, loss of money. And so that, I think, was the end goal. And again, very cynical to think that. But I don't trust our foreign policy establishment in the State Department, in the Pentagon. I don't think it's past them to take a country and sacrifice that country for the larger geopolitical goals of the United States. Brutal, absolutely brutal. But then again, we've invaded countries that ended, that cost hundreds of thousands of lives in Afghanistan and Iraq. Is there any remorse from the neocons for that? No, they still defend it. These are the people we're dealing with. They are brutal, they're heartless, and they will rationalize the things that we do as the United States, even if it kills, tens of thousands of people. And guess what? Putin will also make those same calculations, and he'll make decisions that will get tens of thousands of people killed. That is the game they're playing at the very top. If we're Americans, we take our side, of course, but we have to understand their side. Again, if we understand why Putin does what he does, maybe in the future, we can have leaders in this country who are smarter, who can negotiate, who can sit down at the table with Putin and Xi and try to find ways for these things not to happen. There should be never an issue with having a conversation. And that's why I think that Putin ultimately didn't invade Ukraine when Trump was president. Clearly, he understood that Trump was not liked by the establishment. Trump was willing to sit down and have a conversation. He met with Kim Jong-il. And I think with Trump, Putin said, I can at least talk to this guy and try to get something done. And then when Trump was taken out of office and Biden comes in, it's right back to that establishment, neoliberal, neoconservative paradigm which concerns Russia. And Putin said, okay, I try with Trump, but the game's over. Now we have to go and get Ukraine before the United States keeps arming them, gives them more and more weapons, and eventually makes them part of NATO, which again, we saw the clip from 2008. George Bush said, let's bring Ukraine into NATO. So that's what we wanted. We wanted Ukraine in NATO. It didn't happen. So anybody saying that we had no plans for Ukraine to be inside NATO, that's nonsense. We did. It just hadn't happened yet, but we were working on it, and Putin understood that and ultimately made his decision to invade Ukraine. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.